Okay, it's summer of 45. That means a few things. First, I went through the technological laws, and I think I found an anomaly there, but I also found that I didn't do the strategic warfare against the Japanese. So they had a whole bunch of transports. That wasn't reasonable, so I went back, did the U.S. Strategic warfare against them. I think the U.S. owes $3 somewhere because they had to rebuild a sub. We'll charge them that sub. We'll put it down here. But what they can do is shift that one into place. And I forgot to unflip things. They have plenty of oil. Okay. They do have to haul the oil to the Hawaiian Islands, but that's not a problem with the amount of transport they have available, which is just the way things work. The Japanese then actually have a transport available. They were able to pull one oil. I've already accounted for that. They're taking all their oil effects except naval. They've spent twice on Navy. So they're still not breaking even, but at least they've staunched the flow a little bit. It's monsoon season in the Pacific. I kind of forgot it last time, but I don't think it had much effect. It basically just limits movement. We aren't seeing a lot of offensive operations. It affects movement in the land areas down in India, Ceylon. I'm not even sure if it hits the Netherlands, East Indies, if that's the case. I just looked it up, but it's just a list of countries. Again, a less elegant solution than WIF's weather zones. Most importantly, what it doesn't affect is it doesn't affect the Pacific. And this I find kind of disturbing, actually, because to some extent naval efforts were hindered by it. But I think on the scale of this game, there would be a clear weather break in just about every turn. There is in WIF too, usually, where you can slip something in. And that's kind of the key, is that you wait on the weather and you make your move based on that. I do like the natural flow of the naval operations better in this than there's this weird cat and mouse game that doesn't seem to reflect anything really that occurs in WIF that I really don't like, where both players are kind of waiting on the other person to commit their navy. Here you don't have to worry about that. You get your navy in your turn, you get to do something, then the other guy gets his navy in his turn, as long as they pay their oil. We'll be fine over here in Axis land as well. And I haven't done the diplomacy, which I should have done already, but I don't think there is anything left. No. So, I guess we start the Axis move. And, it's real hard to try to figure out what to do. Again, the call on attrition versus not attrition. Attrition's great, but it doesn't get you those driving offensives, obviously. But it tends to be pretty good in terms of your kill value. Maybe about as good as an offensive, and it doesn't cost you anything. So that's one of the considerations. Of course, the weather's good over here in Europe, so we may want to try to punch those Ruskies back. Thing here, I kind of played a decent amount yesterday, not a huge amount, and not today. The game's drawing me back in a little better. I've got to go to work right now, so I can't complete that, but there's this could I get a turn in here? No, I got 10 minutes. Forget it. It is one of the problems is as the game goes on, and this is the same with a lot of these larger games. WIF is definitely the case. Early on, you can get by a 10-minute, 15-minute turn. Yeah, that could happen for at least one of the maps, one of the factions, whatever, an impulse in WIF. But once you get to this point in the game, man, it's going to take me 5-10 minutes to figure out kind of what I want to do. you know, in terms of do I want to do that attrition attack? What's going on here? Here it's pretty easy, to tell you the truth. I don't have enough force to do much. So, wow, I really don't have enough force. The U.S. is kind of cracking my line there, it looks like. Ouch. And that's the thing. That's what an offensive does, is it forces you to throw more forces in. The attrition attacks, I'm picking little guys like this off, and then I got to replenish them somewhere, but, you know, I got to rebuild them. But this actually drains my capabilities in that sector. I had a fairly good, I had like 4 hexes of units, and they've been destroyed. The U.S. spent a cost to do that, not just the 15 BRPs, but also in terms of units lost. But now it's looking like a breakthrough is possible, where before I was kind of looking and saying, well, do I just want an attrition? I'm not going to get anywhere here, and they can reinforce it. Well, now they have to reinforce it. Now the Germans have to use some of their limited resources to put some decent troops down here, or to just say, okay, well, we'll fall back or whatever. And falling back may be the answer. The only problem with that is Turkey. If we lose Egypt, Turkey begins to get shakier. We're losing Libya. The North African campaign is, of course, very important to the Turks. They don't want to see the Axis losing ground there. And so the advantage of Egypt has helped them. We've already been driven far enough east that we can't really affect the Italian, any potential invasion of Italy or anything like that. That's one nice thing about trying to hold on at Tunisia. You kind of, it gives you another place where you can affect the naval situation. The Germans have some pretty solid forces here on the East Front in terms of armor and such. They really don't have enough local air superiority anywhere. They could maybe concentrate everything and maybe manage a little bit of a push up here in the along the Russian northern border into the Baltic states. But it's a high expense to gain what amounts to a few hexes and maybe do a little bit more damage. I feel like Germany's money is very important right now. They're going to need to recycle units pretty quickly to hold the line against the West. So I'm kind of taking a pass with them everywhere, actually, and just going to do attrition everywhere. And down in Thailand, we see the Japanese line collapsed. They made an attack on the Chindits. It ended up in an ugly exchange. They were not at good odds. I don't know why I made the attack, but it's basically looked like a losing situation. Well, now I've made it much worse. I think with a lucky attack, I could have built Thai units and held that line a little longer. Instead, though, I could have fallen back on a line down around Bangkok in southern Vietnam. And now it's beginning to kind of look like I'm just collapsing completely there. And I pulled my sub out because, you know what, it just doesn't do me much good against the U.S. shipping. Just one sub, and it is vaguely useful in terms of supporting the naval units. And I can kind of put it out on station, and it'll help me make interceptions by searching. So seems like the best I can do. I still have builds to do for the Axis, but so, you know, we may well see Thailand look a little bit less vulnerable. Instead of resolving my counter error, but things have gotten more complicated. I have to make my decision in the Russians at the same time as I make it with the Western Allies. I guess I could do the Russians first, actually. But since I start with the Western Allies most of the time, this turn has become kind of painful because I've got an air base here in Sweden that's going to allow me to bomb Breslau with almost no defenses. I've still got the interceptors in play, but I could have a whole bunch of eastern front air power, which means the Russians are going to have to do a full offensive on the Eastern Front so that they can knock out the German air power that might interfere with a bombing run on Breslau. This is going to be a massive run. There's no ACAC here at Breslau, so chances are that's going to get firestormed, I think. I'm also coming up on being able to start dropping atomic bombs for the U.S. Their technology on it, they've been holding off making the A-bomb production yet because they wanted to get the biggest modifier they could. So they did an atomic research in general in the spring, or maybe in the summer here, whatever. And they're going to be moving forward with the actual A-bomb capability in their next research role. And that's going to allow, if they can slip through, to start nuking Germany. They're not going to have to, they're really not in a position where they can drop A-bombs on Japan. They have to win the naval war a little bit better than they have, either so that they can get sea supply back to China. I mean, I've got British supply here, so theoretically I could, but I also haven't won the Chinese war. I'm nowhere near where I could fly from, I don't think. So if I took off out of, well, I don't have a Chongqing's not present, so up here in Lanzhou, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I just miss. I'm a little bit too far away to hit Kagoshima, which I think would count. I have to look up what the legal targets for Japanese bombing are. But I also don't have any Pacific bombers built yet. I've been focusing so much on that aspect over here on the Axis side that, you know, you build your bombers for one side or the other is what it comes down to. Now, I think these can't be recycled over to the Pacific, even if I win Germany. I have to look up to see if that's the role. But anyway, right now, the Russians are going to have to kind of take their turn in conjunction with the Western Allies, simply so that they can clear those, at least this one decision, and some other aspects as to where I'm placing my planes, etc. I'm still not sure what I'm doing here. I think I'm going to attrition. I kind of set myself up for that. And the Allies are making another landing up here in Lorient. More forces coming in into Marseille. There's really just not a lot I can do about it. I don't know. You know, the Italians probably should have interfered, but historically the Italian Navy didn't really play too hard here. Just like the Japanese didn't really make a big showdown as things were getting closer, but in their case there were oil restrictions. In the Italian case, I think they had there was enough oil available that they could have tried to prevent things. But I do have some parity. The one difference is I've got more battleships coming. I just built 2 last turn. I've got another one coming next turn, big ones. So I've got a chance to do a lot more damage if I wait a turn, I think. I don't know. Allied turn, especially the Western, at least the Western Allied turn, was very, very potent. But we missed the strategic bombing, and we only got to 23. We could have knocked out a couple of oil instead, but we went for Leipzig. What I didn't realize was that's not covered by any of my air cover. Actually, one of them could have played in. Oops. But the Russians didn't have to throw their entire air force in. They could have just aimed at this plane or the stack that was here. I think there was one over in Poznan too. Poznan, which they hit, but I'm not sure. But they didn't have to go as heavily as they did in terms of their own expenditure, which means they could have gotten their attrition attacks. They ended up making no ground attacks. They just couldn't find one that looked good. They've got a lot more troops coming in, especially now. A lot more troops coming in. A lot of 3-point infantry that they hadn't had ready yet, which they can build this next turn. But, you know, They could have done some damage and gained some hexes on the Germans, which they didn't do. They did a little bit of damage down here. That damage isn't too important. It's generally 1-point infantries. But look at what happened. Breakthroughs cutting through here. Paris fell. Vichy did not. The Allied forces were stymied there. But we got... Now, these guys are going to be in partial supply because of Vichy, so they're not in as bad a shape as they might have looked. If I had taken Vichy, this would have been very bad because I believe it would have cut off this entire pocket here. And then over here we cut off the Axis armor. We've pushed in. Egypt looks like it's open for the taking. Turkey looks like it's going to be accessible. We're going to have to do, a major strategic withdrawal, and that'll let the Russians come in, of course. Like I said, the bombing only did 23 points. Just missed the bonus of the firebomb, which, those are kind of neat because, like the atomic bombs, they screw with Germany's morale and cause it, basically, Germany works off their diplomacy value. If their diplomacy goes below 0, boom, they're out. Every country has its own little stupid surrender calculations. There's, not, again, like in so many things, there's not a cohesive system in play. Anyway, that means it's time to go over to the Pacific, which, well, that's not going to be quite as exciting. Remember, I've got the monsoons, and that's going to cause real problems for the Brits. It's not as bad for the Japanese, although I probably cheated with them. And the U.S. Navy will probably come out and try to get the Japanese, try to see if we can slip into a Midway or something again. Big naval battle happening over here at Midway, and the final Japanese fleet is coming to play here. Third task force. I think the U.S. is going to stick around. They've lost more big stuff. They've lost an aircraft carrier, although the Japanese have taken a big battleship. Is that the Yamato? Yeah. As a damage result. It almost got hit by the submarine. The U.S. submarine has a hard time hitting them, actually. It's had some significant penalties, but anyway. We're seeing basically a climactic attempt here. The U.S. still has greater air power, but that's beginning to diminish. But the Japanese surface capability is not so dominating. So a bunch of cruisers can kind of screen the carriers and perform some journeyman duty. I think I'm going to pull Task Force 3 out, though. I just don't have enough force there to cover. The question is, I can move some of my planes into play, and I'm going to try to make the landing. I'm on a tight time limit, and I'm doing enough attritional damage here that I feel like I can afford to take the losses that I'm taking, but I don't think I can afford to risk this carrier group any further. It's gotten chewed up in the front position. I've got another carrier group with a bunch of battle cruisers protecting it, so that should be able to hold out a little better than otherwise would be the case. The U.S. has largely destroyed Japan's naval capabilities. They're down to a few carriers. This thing is useless, so I'll transfer its planes over, and Task Force 2 is getting out of the way. So this is really all we're down to now, is just Task Force 1. But the problem is that task force is lined up against my destroyers. And I really don't know if I can afford to have my destroyers defeated. Now, if I call my invasion off, the Japanese can leave and not suffer further losses here. If I don't call them off, though, I think the Japanese want to stick around and see if they can finish off the Pacific Fleet's destroyer complement, which is absolutely necessary for any kind of invasion. And unfortunately, I can rebuild destroyers pretty quickly, but next turn I don't have any in the pipeline. I may have, no, I was going to say I may have some that moved from the East Coast already, but it's going to take me a couple of turns to rebuild my destroyer fleet. Whereas the Japanese Navy really is in no condition to fight anymore. So I think the US has to pull out at this point. Although it is kind of attractive to try to take down the rest of the Japanese fleet. They have a little bit of carrier air, but they're not really using it defensively. They're using it offensively entirely, which is tasty. It's just, I can't afford to keep losing these. 10 points of destroyers allows me to deliver a pretty good strike next turn, which is almost guaranteed to succeed. Whereas the strike this turn, I may lose all my destroyers, and that may put me back a couple turns. So I think I'm pulling out, and but I guess I'm calling this a pretty major naval victory for the U.S. Although the losses are humongous. I mean, the U.S. lost a couple of carriers. We don't know how many light ships because I've been making change and such not. Japanese, a couple of battleships, a heavy carrier, a couple of battle cruisers, and then the damage, to their heavy ships here. But to some extent, there's a question of whether the Japanese can afford to have a navy anymore. They may be better off trying to support their air units. It may be time to convert over to kamikazes and just try to do the best that we can with what we've got. And, this is what should happen with Japan, right? They're unable to continue the fight, basically. All right, we'll clean this one, and I think I'll do the economics for the Allies tomorrow. This took well over an hour to do this one naval battle, which is more. I think it took more time than any European map has taken overall, but we haven't seen the big offensives happening on the East Front. Which is what the major naval battles are compared to, or were compared to, back when Empire of the Rising Sun was first released. Alright, too exciting to report, just a production phase. I had some thoughts of trying to create another force down in Fiji to, conduct a Southeast Pacific campaign. It doesn't look like a valid concept at this point. I just don't have enough transport capability in terms of destroyers. I am building up more. I also don't have the defense, right? Remember, the U.S. Navy took a pretty big hit in that huge battle too, and it was there was parity between the two fleets in a lot of ways. The Japanese have been weakened, but not to the point where I can have two different U.S. task forces operating in strength the way that they did historically. That's actually one of the problems I've had with WIF as well, which is that dividing your force tends to be not a great idea. And you can basically, in either game, put out a huge naval concentration in one sector. And then it means that you've committed to that sector more or less. So what I've got here in Hawaii has to kind of follow this path, almost as much as if it were some kind of point-to-point game or something, because the only route back, at least until I take these, the only route back is through the U.S. and Tahiti, etc., in order to commit to the South Pacific. So there's not really a lot of option right now. Now, once I cut to here, sure, I could start one, but who knows, I mean, if I get that far, it's not a big deal. I guess the biggie is, as I start to gain these, And as I trim the Japanese, as they're less and less able to send their navy out, maybe I'll have more opportunity to split my forces with more impunity. But right now, the battle sizes, the fleet sizes are just too close to each other. But I guess the reason that I came back to chat wasn't that. It was that I see very, very little of the high-end armor. The Russians have built 156. The Germans, historically, I guess, built a fair number of these. Not a huge number, but they've got a lot available, as do the Russians. And the Russians did eventually. But because the Germans have been concentrating on infantry and defensive force pool builds, they haven't built up their armor capabilities, even though they have the technology for it. It's kind of a weird thing. You can tech it up in Gathering Storm. All that does is gives you the later option to eventually get those heavy armor units. So all I've got is the normal 4.6s. I think the old Third Reich had like a couple of German 5.6s and a few more Russian ones, but they come in so late that, you know, the game's essentially over at that point. And the game feels essentially over now. In fact, right from the beginning, it feels over in a Third Reich game because you know the Axis, and especially in the combined game, you know the Axis can't survive. The victory conditions are how long can you last, and that's really got to be your mindset, is grab what you can, armor what you can. There's no real, you know, victory condition requirement to what you have to seize. Some games, like Unconditional Surrender, for example, which is outstanding, have this, hey, you got to get so far or else just forget it. You can't win as the Axis. There's nothing like that. So the fact that I didn't push into Russia doesn't penalize me at all. I was able to create what I consider, to tell you the truth, one of the easier situations. I've got I've got the entire German army, well, but theoretically, I've got the entire German army that I could build up from what I produced. I haven't expended anything into attacking Russia, and now I'm defending close to the choke point in terms of the terrain that Russia has to punch through, and it's a hard job. You can see the Russians aren't able to just get that shattering offensive. I looked and I'm just like, well, it doesn't pay to make any attacks, actually, because I don't have air power. But in terms of, you know, the drive back across Russia, we're not going to see anything like that. This is going to be really an attritional war. Even if there are offensive actions taken, you're not going to see those broad sweeping moves. Now here you are seeing, because there's so much additional force that the Allies are bringing to bear. And the Italians kind of feel like they've useless here. They're just being hemmed in so that they can't do anything significant while the U.S. goes after the main prize, which is right now chasing the Germans out of France. Once we have France, well, then the German line becomes tougher because they've got the West Wall, and then maybe turning against Italy makes more sense. It also looks like we're going to hit the soft underbelly much more easily than, and that's because of the existence of Turkey. It becomes a weak spot eventually, right? Just like Italy's a weak spot. You know, you want those extra forces, but anyway. I guess I just wanted to chat because I put in a fair amount of effort in terms of the end of year, the purchases and everything, especially the U.S. purchases are just so huge. They're spending, you know, 200 and something a turn building up their forces, and there's no way anybody can withstand that. They can win any attrition war. It's just a matter of how long will it take, and that's what the game takes as its conception. WIF sort of does as well, but as we showed in my play, it is possible to turn that around. I think more modern World War II games follow the Third Reich viewpoint more than the WIF viewpoint, by just saying, look, the Axis really does not have a chance. You know, Germany has to pretty much knock out Russia for there to be a chance. That is possible, but in this one, even doing that isn't enough for the eventual victory, because there's no way to really seal the U.S. in. I guess if you take Russia and Britain out, you might be able to survive as the Germans in this. Certainly past 46, but I'm talking about a general projection of survival. The problem with that is, again, unlike WIF, WIF does allow for this, but it looks hopeless in some cases. I don't think there's a way you can kind of shut down Britain and the Russians completely. And even if you conquer them in both systems, they'll come back. So what we saw in my WIF game was Russia was really sealed off, you know, somewhere in Asia, the part of the map that doesn't exist here, where there is kind of a choke point, and there was nothing they could do. And then it became really the Axis turning against the U.S. and pretty much bottling them up completely. And it just became clear that if there was going to be some kind of Allied victory, it was going to happen, you know, 10 years down the line or something. It wasn't going to happen there. And once you start getting into that territory, I think you have to kind of say, okay, this is the end, right? So doing this strategic, the research. Well, the U.S. now has an atomic attack available, which I put here. But that led me to thinking about the way the strategic bombing in the old Third Reich system, in particular, certainly in Advanced Third Reich, I remember this, had a system by which if you took strategic bombing hits, you had to reallocate some of your tactical air into the interception box. But there weren't specific interceptors. Maybe in Advanced Third Reich there were, but in the original Third Reich. But I think even in Advanced Third Reich there weren't. There weren't specific interceptors. You put your regular air in there. And you didn't have onboard interception either. So I wasn't able to find that in this rule book, and I think that's a rule that's just disappeared. It's funny because a lot of times I find myself, from the very beginning when I was tackling this rule book, I found myself saying, geez, that doesn't seem right. That's not how it used to be, you know? And then looking up and finding out that my reading of the rules booklet here, which is not the most perfectly written thing in the world, didn't comport with what I remembered, and then I would, on more careful reading, much more careful reading, including cross-referencing and everything, be able to figure out that, yeah, you know, the old rule still applies. So that, for example, the 15 BRP limit of spending, that didn't appear to be applying. And I thought, wow, that's cool, because that was always one of the things that bugged me in Third Reich was, oh yeah, you know, I can have this massive offensive and it costs me the same as something this size. Like the entire East Front, running that costs about the same in resources as hitting this. Now, obviously oil for planes and such on makes that a little bit different. But and on other cases, though, you know, like with the new oil rules, I thought that they had implications that were more WIF-like. Hey, I can unflip units in the midst of a turn and keep using them and stuff like that. And I kind of liked that. Well, that doesn't turn out to be the case. The other thing I wanted to talk about was my GMT package came today. And, yeah, a couple of Invictuses. I had trouble finding games. Gathering Storm is one of the reasons that I have this many games. I've been trying to keep things low. These are kind of nice because they're small. You know, I've gotten to the point where, wow, I really don't need any more boxed games. I need more shelves more. I mean, I've got some serious problems. And then I've got that closet, which has way too many in it. They're invading the living room now. I've got some shelving there. I really don't have much room in this room. So, but this is the most interesting of them, and it's the one that'll have some effect on not what I'm playing right now, but on some of my near future plans. I've been planning on talking about all of the big strategic World War II games that I've experienced and played. And well, that's gonna be delayed by this. There's a couple I'm not gonna touch. I'm not gonna touch in any depth, obviously, because I've never played it. The War or its predecessors. I've looked at some of the TSR SPI Eastern Theater of operations. One thing that saddens me is the expansion for Axis Empires isn't out. I would like to have given Axis Empires another try, but honestly, I'm not going to bump another big monster into play. And this is no monster, by the way. This is a reasonable sized game. I'm not going to bump another big monster into play. I'll just, I guess, kind of review what I looked at and what my impressions with Axis Empires were. Overall, they were positive, but I can't remember much of anything about the game. I mean, I remember the card selection and some of that. But in a lot of ways, Unconditional Surrender drowned out some of my thinking along that, because there is a design similarity between them, and that makes sense given that Vasta, was working on the AE and then moved over to Unconditional Surrender. Anyway, the thing about getting new games, I think for some people it's like, oh hell, it's time to clean up this one. I got something new and shiny, right? That's not the way it works for me. For me, it's like, wow, now I'm like more energized to play this because I got to get it out of the way. I know I have to finish this. We'll see how long that lasts. I figure I don't have that much more to go. This really isn't that long a game, although the turns are starting to get a little bit more painful than they were in terms of actual effort involved. But the biggest thing that's been getting in my way is just a sense of ennui. And it's gotten to the point where I fall asleep, and just don't want to be awake ever. I'm taking naps every day and everything. All right. Now, I guess the Axis turn kind of winds down with some air I used. Lost my pocket battleships. They actually managed to slip out, do a raid. They're way back in now, since they can't land back here at Bray. They were destroyed in the English Channel. There was a chance they might slip through. Pretty low. They took out a destroyer on the way, though. Ooh. Pulling back to a somewhat defensible position here. Attrition over on the East Front. It doesn't do a lot, kills a lot of 1-point units. But if the Russians aren't going to play the attrition game and can't manage an offensive, they're going to lose. The thing is, the German line is getting thinned out as they throw more forces into France. And they may fall to the Russians just due to having too weak a line, because the Russian line is thickening a little bit. Oh, la 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 la. Over here, Japanese. They were able to get some oil through. You can see less oil effects. They didn't take the big hit to the BRP base. They have the other advantage, if you want to call it that, of not having a big navy. Now, they're not able to really rebuild their navy. They have to spend all their shipbuilding points on trying to maintain that shipping capability. Otherwise, they don't have the oil, and they start burning through and taking the oil effect. So, it may actually make sense to just concede the naval war. But that's the only thing that can defeat them. So there's some degree of, we have to try to stop that. We did manage to build something of a line down here because unflipping units, we actually had a few left extra. So we were able, there's nothing that can really challenge us down here. There's not even a British Navy kicking around in here or anything. So we were able to push some forces down into Southeast Asia. But as you can see, we've lost that line we had up along the Burma border. And now Thailand's being invaded. So, one thing that may be really big is when I was trying to assess the penalty for losing Paris. I don't think the Germans have collected the French income all game. That's $20 each year. That's a fairly significant amount of money. They may have gotten it the first year they took it. I don't have a German flag and did not have one in France, and I can't seem to find in the paperwork that I've been collecting that money. So that's a pretty hefty amount of production. Now, granted, the war hasn't been going all that long. I don't remember when it started, 42 or something, but still, that's a significant amount, a chunk of probably most of what they don't have produced right now, and that could have been a big deal. C'est la vie, as it turns out. Basically, I moved my ACAC. I've got some protection over here. I don't really have much for Berlin itself, and it's within range. I just have such a limited amount of air power that it's really hard. Now, if I pull these guys back to Posen, they can cover part of the line that's kind of weak, and they can cover Berlin. And that'll kind of force the Allies to work a little harder. Alternatively, the Allies have to bomb Germany this turn. They could shift to an Italian theater bombing. As it stands, though, all I got is some naval air to protect Rome itself. No, I got these guys. So, attacks coming from Sardinia. We should get a little American flag up there. So we have both Corsica and Sardinia under our control. Can hit Rome. Pretty much written that off. Both Germany and Italy got a big 5-point battleship this turn. And Germans have to decide, they paid for it. They have to decide what they're going to do with their navy. It's not terribly helpful to just keep it in port. Historical, but so given that they didn't contest the landing and it's really too late to do anything about that, we might see a massive German fleet go out raiding again. And if it tries to do that, of course, the Brits up here in Scapa Flow can intervene, but then we have a big naval battle and maybe do something about it. On the other hand, the fact that the Allied forces have to keep the big fleets that they have is probably pretty damn helpful to the Japanese. Otherwise, I could send them around Africa and have another task force operating down here and starting to strip Japanese possessions that I really can't afford to lose. Not that the Brits have a whole lot of forces down here, but I have some South Africans I forgot to deploy last turn. Maybe I'll remember. Who knows how long they've been stuck there. Things like that happen. Things like France not producing its income. That's a little harder to swallow. But troops getting forgotten and just left in godforsaken places where they live. No, South Africa is fine, I'm sure. As long as you have an armored car with flame packs underneath it to protect you. Just shows how little I know, right? Alright. Yeah, I'm in a chatty mood. The Allied forces have pushed through into Egypt. Captured much of France. You can see we're up to Antwerp here. The Russians have managed breakthroughs, pocketing some Germans here. There's some Germans pocketed here too, I have to worry about. I did not launch an atomic attack because I could reach Breslau. And now that the German planes have all been knocked out, oops, that thing probably should be dead, but it was involved in the fight, but I forgot to mark it. We did manage to get a firestorm here Now, what's weird is there was a Russian rocket that could hit here too. We did like close to 30 points. Only 25 of them count enough to charge the Firestorm because Breslau is only worth 25. So that's what hits Germany. It causes some effects. The Allies get an extra dip point. I don't know what else. Those things clear up though. I gotta pay attention to when that happens. It's been a very fatiguing European turn, well over an hour, to just do the tactical, the ground battles here, including strategic warfare. You might, and I bombed Milan as well for a point. You might well say, look, if the Russians can hit this with rockets, why are you worrying about, why don't you hit Berlin or something like that? And it was appealing, but Berlin has that extra ACAC on it, and it seemed a good reason to avoid hitting it when I've got an open target here that I didn't realize that the Allies could hit very easily. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hexes away. And they actually have all kind of bonuses at this point because they have good air range and everything. So, the Russian rocket was wasted. I'm also been tossing a rocket this way just to keep Plestine knocked out. I'm not really worrying about oil. Germany's awash in oil right now. All those synthetic plants and the 2 stations. But this breakthrough is very troubling. We're getting awfully close to Berlin here. Germany looks like they're having a hard time holding the line. And it's just a matter of concentrating the Russian force and getting air power. Air power was key to the whole thing. And it didn't hurt to have British planes able to fly missions in there. You'll notice I've got some hit markers on some Allied aircraft. That's just my way of coping with the numerical counter, so I don't have to make change every time. I can just put little markers saying, hey, these are used. Doesn't have much effect anymore. They could probably be removed, but in terms of, I'll clean it up when I clean up the SRs, etc. But yeah, this was a big turn for the Allies, and it's making it look like Germany may actually fall. Germany's got a lot of diplomatic points, though, although their economic situation is starting to look a little bit more dire. Not only are they expending a lot on building their units, and they've got these pockets that are just doomed, but they're also actually being hit with the economic effects of the war at this point. So that's going to be kind of ugly. The Italian Navy didn't move again because there's so many British ships down in the Med. I just don't want to chance it. If the Brits decide to shift forces over to the Pacific, that's fine. But as of right now, that's not really happening. Vichy fell. It doesn't take effect yet. It takes effect after the Axis turn. It's pretty much guaranteed, though. And yeah, we've got no supply from here down, because we got a zone of control running into here. And you can see we charged along the coast, grabbed everything. This is pretty intense, actually. Just attrition combat down here in the Med for the Russians, though. I think they're allowed to do that. Maybe I cheated because the U.S. did not do an attrition attack there. But I think because they're different, not different countries, but different alliances. The Russians are considered their own little alliance. I think they're allowed to do that. Since they did an offensive in the east, though, they couldn't do attrition up in Finland or anything like that. But, I think they did their job. Okay, for the Allied turn, some slow advances through the jungle. The Communist Chinese actually broke out up here and did an assault, which doesn't really hurt them because they don't have to pay money. Attrition combat did virtually nothing this time. The nationalists didn't get a good roll, and over here, these guys aren't really in contact anymore to the extent. Another invasion attempt, and the Japanese fleet sortied again. And you can see that did not work out very well at all. Of course, I'm only losing carriers. I lost some extra planes I lost planes that could have based on this carrier. One of them went back to Wake. I don't think I have an air base there, which is kind of silly, but, or Midway. The U.S. lost one carrier, which actually means maybe more in some ways because the Japanese have a couple of carriers in reserve I didn't have planes for. But I lost some extra planes with that carrier. I would have liked to have recycled the planes onto the carrier. I also have, repairable and ready-to-produce carriers in large numbers. So with a little devotion of points, I could get carriers back in line. The problem is I'm spending all those points in trying to keep my transports up. And I don't know, I haven't done the strategic warfare there yet. But yeah, the Japanese fleet is looking pretty puny at this point. Unfortunately, the U.S. invasion is somewhat of a shoestring operation. We have a one-to-one attack going in there, and we're going to have to do it. Basically, my thoughts were, well, I could take a couple turns to swing around through here and try to get positioned for a South Pacific attack where the defenses aren't quite as strong. But you know what? By the time I start doing that, these defenses are going to be beefed up a bit. And having to get a port down here means that I have to hit certain key areas, basically. The alternative then is, okay, I could wait until I have more destroyers, but I don't have more coming online in enough numbers to make the difference. So I feel like I have to take this chance. It's not a good attack, but, if I get lucky, it means the Japanese may fall a couple turns earlier than they would otherwise, and if I don't get lucky, well, I just have to devote to building even more destroyers, which I can do. And I get very lucky. An exchange minus might have been better, although I'd probably lose some ships for that, or whatever. I have some aircraft involved too. But the defender loses half his factors, ignoring DMs. That means he didn't get taken out, but he got weakened. And that's a big deal, because it's hard for Japan to get more forces out there. So the islands are probably going to fall. The other problem with this is I have to take 2 islands unless I spend one of my artificial ports on Midway. That would then get me as far as Wake, and I'd have to spend one on Wake. It might be necessary because there are targets further in that are valuable. Anyway, we didn't take it, but we also didn't get hosed, which was really the expected result. Hey, I've got another round of combat. I've got high quality troops. Well, this one's going to be easier, so we probably will take it. I was talking about, I think, 24, 26 strength points. I'll have to calculate precisely, probably. Versus 5. So I was at 5. I can add 15 naval. That brings me to 20. I have 4, 7, and 8 here is 15 divided by 3 is 5 more. So 25. So yeah, I think I have a 5-to-1. I'm allowed up to 3 rounds of combat because I have a CTL of 3 now. And 5-to-1 is very easy. And the Japanese lose Midway. Yay! I was considering trying to slip a European Axis turn in. I've got to go shopping. I got to take a dump. The dump's not moving forward, so I needed a little something to give me some time before I head out. And I'm sure you needed to know that. And I thought, well, the Axis turns in Europe haven't been taking very long. Maybe I'll do that. But as I start to set it up, I see, look, I got pockets of isolated units all over the place. I'm going to have to use isolated 2 marker, even though that's not the case. That's for shrinkage of territory or whatever. I don't really use it very effectively. But anyway, we've got enough units pocketed that I think I'm going to have to take offensive actions, at least on a limited scale, and try to break out a supply path. Of course, the problem with that is once you've got units pocketed, unless you're able to turn things around and go on the offensive, you're probably never going to unpocket them. But the alternative is to just fall back and abandon them and let them, try to fight their way, try to do some damage on their way out. Over here, we also have units that are going to be probably in supply. So I don't think, it's hard to tell. What the hell do I use the Russian Navy for other than this? So we may actually see that a contested supply zone, if I remember. Then over on the Japanese side, although I wasn't intending to do them, I did consider their oil effects, and I took an oil effect on Navy this time. They actually gained an oil this turn, but the reason is their Navy is not big enough to contest anymore. Not all of these are flipped, but it's just, it doesn't make sense to me to send them out at this moment. So I took the Army effect off because I'm kind of interested in, I don't know. I'm not sure why, mainly because I'm gaining oil and I don't need to stockpile oil for the rest of the game. So since I'm gaining anyway, and I don't need the Navy, I figured, well, I can take that off. Do I need the air? Well, look, I've got one air unit here that might be at risk, but for the most part, the Japanese have carved out what they need, and or what they're going to be able to have, and now it's really a question of fortifying that through various means, and those various means being the actual fortifications, but also air units, just to prevent the U.S. from having an easy a time of taking it. I can't do anything to stop them from taking it. I can just make them hurt a little bit more, maybe slow them down a little bit. Maybe they'll fail on an important role. I don't know. Maybe it'll come down to resources. To tell you the truth, that's what it really comes down to, is how many destroyers do the U.S. have as to how far they can go. And I've got to worry about Japan itself, too. We don't want to make Japan so easy that it's just conquered. Historically they had to use the A-bombs rather than, or they chose to use the A-bombs rather than an invasion. But the way Japan is right now, there's no defense there. And that's the game, so, yeah. Without clear breakout capabilities, the Germans' task was difficult, to tell you the truth. Here they actually managed to save the units. I thought I could do it up here, but I didn't. I don't have air support, air power in either case. Here the Allies threw a bunch of air in. I made a low odds attack, lost the infantry that attacked, but I did save these guys, and they're gonna, be something of a thorn. The main reason they're saved is there wasn't enough Allied armor. There's an armor here which cuts these hexes, but I could slip out this way because there's no armor down there. So the Allies were not able to totally destroy the supply zone there. The German forces back here, well, we pulled out of Königsberg and attacked painfully some partisans. Unfortunately, we've still got a partisan weakness in our line. We also managed to slaughter one of the Russian armored units through a kind of lucky die roll. But otherwise, this has been a pretty mellow turn for the Axis. I don't know if this is going to not produce from now on. The Firestorm doesn't get removed. I thought it got removed at some rate. I know there's a $25 cost immediately. I don't know, and I think that's supposed to be prorated, but no, it's not prorated because it's bombing losses. But I don't know if that actually prevents the place from producing at this point. I doubt it. I didn't see anything along those lines. Anyway, the thing is that the Allies on both sides are able to use their air power defensively, and whoever doesn't have air support is at a real disadvantage in this game. I guess you could say the same with WIF as well. The air support is really important. You're not going to maintain an offensive unless you could at least kind of neutralize the enemy's air power. You don't need to have the dominance in it, but you kind of need to neutralize it. And whiff, you kind of need the dominance to some extent. Just because you need higher odds attacks for things to work, which kind of means you need a lot of air power to flip units or to add to your combat strength on ground support operations to get any kind of good odds for an attack. Collapse is coming quicker than I thought. Germany's economy is wrecked. Now this is the winter turn. This is the turn when you don't have any extra economic value. So when I said economics counts when you're counting for surrender, it's because it counts towards your diplomatic points. So if you have a lot of cash on hand, you can boost that. And the German economics have just decreased. Now they have still a significant number of diplomacy points, so I'm not worried about them surrendering here. I'm not bothering checking. But the line that I was able to build here, I undertook my actions thinking that I could stiffen both a line here and a fair line going along the west wall. Well, the west wall is crap right now, which means the Allies could actually punch through it on a breakthrough. And I'm very afraid of that happening, but my decisions were made. And equally bad, my line here on the east front is just horrible as well. And I'm out of cash. I've got tons and tons of stuff I could build, armor and everything, but I just don't have the money anymore. The extra infantry were isolated units, but I'm actually tapped out completely. The Italians are in somewhat better shape, for whatever that matters. Though I do notice something that really worries me. I only seem to have 5 air factors of Italians, and this is the one thing that can happen in this game, I think. I've always worried about it when I played it before, was because you're making change back and forth and adding new units to the force pool and this, that, and the other, it's possible that units might disappear, and you wouldn't be terribly aware of it, especially in the change-making process. I think it's highly unlikely I only had one 5-factor Italian air unit at the beginning of the game, and even if I added no additional ones, that seems awfully weak to me. I thought I had about 2 of them in total, but yeah, I don't know. Whatever. Maybe the aircraft factories were hit in that little bombing raid. On the Japanese front, there's almost nothing they can do. I considered repealing the construction oil effect at a cost of an oil to get more infantry on the board, basically. But infantry is not my real problem. My real problem is my shipbuilding rate. And I've got to build a number of transports to keep me so that I can get some oil, and at the same time get ships being produced. And I'm repairing a carrier and a big battleship. This guy is available whenever I want, so I'm holding off on triggering that big heavy carrier. But I probably am going to go another fallow turn before I challenge the U.S. again. The problem with that, of course, is the U.S. just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and the Japanese are not. But I need to put some kind of token resistance. We have gotten a better line in place here, a little bit of attrition losses for the Allies, but not enough to do us any real good. So some heavy ones on the Chinese, the nationalist Chinese, but with the communists beginning to be active, I just have a world of problems in China too. I mean, it's just everything's collapsing, right? And it's one of the things about playing the Axis in some of these games, but in most of them, you have more you can kind of do. In this, I feel like I'm just being a punching bag, which isn't that terrible, I suppose. But I don't feel like, unless you in the old Third Reich, France was a valid player, it may still be. Unless you're France, I feel like all the powers have a chance to be on the offensive and the defensive. And that's fine, but there's a difference between, I just got to take his blow and then I'm going to come back and schwack him, which is really, what the Russians presumably would normally do. The Russians here didn't have to take any damage. And that's because of the Gathering Storm choices. Or the Brits also, with the Western Allies, hey, we're losing everywhere. Yeah, but we come back and we do fine. Same over here. You know you've got something coming forward. And that's kind of different from where the Axis is at this point in the game. You kind of have this, okay, well, you know, we're going to lose the war. There's no question. You kind of should know that when you open the box with this game. Not with WIF. But can I win the game? And, you know, there's still stuff you can do on the defensive. It's just you are so on the defensive, and there's so little you can really do in terms of, you know, unless the opponent makes a mistake and leaves an area without air support or something, there's so little you can do in terms of being able to manage an offensive without at least close to parity in the air power. It's like the Western Allies are going to be making a landing in Toronto, but the problem with this is and there's going to be a major naval showdown here. I'm also going to make some naval transfer to probably Amsterdam, but the German fleet is a dicier thing to send out. It's big. It could actually cause some serious damage to the Allied fleet. But the problem is if I lose it, that opens me up to Russian invasions. There's beach line in the Baltic that's not available on the other side, in the North Sea side of things. So that becomes a kind of tricky question, is do I want to open myself up? The Russians have 4 destroyers. That means they could send 2 strength points. I can probably defend against that. So, given how much the Allies rely on their Navy for the operations here, I think it may be important for me to hit it at this point, or maybe later. That's the whole thing. But if I do it later, the fleet from the Med, some of it may come up here and make the job harder. On the other hand, if I lose both my Axis fleets, a lot of the Allied forces could move to the Pacific map. As long as there's some Axis force, there's some threat. And the danger, of course, with the Italians is, hey, if I don't force this showdown, I could lose Italy. If the Italians are actually attacked, now they don't have anything in North Africa. Maybe I should be invading Malta. It's a freebie. I'll let it go for a turn. Say those French troops lasted a little longer than they should have. It's unlikely the Axis can do anything about that. But there's definite reason for an invasion of Malta. I just have only so many resources, and those resources that I have are right now devoted to the Toronto landing and trying to build that out. At least I have a port there or a beachhead, either one, that'll allow me to reinforce that. Right now, I don't really have a whole hell of a lot to do with forces in North Africa. These guys, they're just streaming up, and, you know, yeah, they're going to grind into Turkey, and there's going to be problems, but I don't think the Germans can afford to try to hold Turkey too hard. You know, they got big enough problems on their own, and the Italians surely can't. So I think by opening up a front in southern Italy, I'm actually opening greater opportunities for myself. I think the Axis is going to be falling very quickly in Europe. This is a different story, and this is the one that's not really affected by Gathering Storm. This is me playing the Japanese with that sort of, hey, I'm delaying everything tactic that I like to use everywhere. I may have made, I'm sure I must have made some big mistakes with the Allies, and I also definitely got unlucky in some cases. But it really kind of looks like that's going to be a tough job. You know, we're already through 45 and not quite into 46. We'll score this at the end. I don't really care too much about the score. You know, I know that my goal is to delay as long as possible with both. That's good enough, right? It's a little weird in terms of my solo plays. I kind of don't take the code breaking into account when I make my strategic decision. Now, in this case, I don't think it was bad either way. The Allies had a tactical, and the Italians had too, and they probably would be trying to intercept either way. But sometimes you want to, I think, base your plans on, hey, what chance do I have of winning the battle? You know, especially if it's going to be a close run thing. In this case, you can see there's a lot of Allied task forces out there. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they're all potent. For example, this one's mainly destroyers, but I've got it kind of hidden. I've gotten better at making some of the sound effects for the battles. There's I don't know if you can see it. A little fireworks show going off, some pro-cancer rally or something. I'm continuing on with the attacks, but the Italian Navy's aircraft carriers are just totally useless because of their air technology. The fact that they start one below in their air DRM and the Axis didn't do any DRM improvements on that has really hurt them. They can only send, I think it's 4 planes for any given wave of an attack, which means they pretty much just get chewed up on the way in. And all this money they spent on aircraft carriers was wasted. So that's one of the places where Gathering Storm doesn't judge well, right? Because you might mismatch your technologies, come out with what looks like a good position on the book, but when you actually start playing it out, it's like, wow, those things just suck. I wasn't expecting this. I expected the carriers to hold up pretty well. And you can see this is the first round of combat. This is what was lost. A couple of battleships due to airstrike was the main effect, but then the U.S. did engage with its frontline ships. And then there were a couple of damages. The Brits had a carrier damaged, a cruiser was damaged. The carrier was damaged by a submarine, actually. So, yeah, the Italians have their subs present. The Brits had theirs too far away and didn't have the, that's kind of impressive, didn't have the capability to move their sub. They should have called it back last turn or whatever, but I've just gotten in the habit of, oh yeah, I'm going to do something over here. Well, this turn I'm not doing something over here, I'm doing it over here. Romulus, the mighty remaining Italian 5-pointer, but we also have a 4-pointer there. I've really done a number, along with the subs, on these American old battleships. They've cracked a few of them open, and that's pretty impressive. The air attacks this time didn't do quite as much. The second rank Italian fleet, which was really just a bunch of light ships, is down to almost nothing. That's just going to get cheesed away. And then, of course, the carriers become available. I'm not sure how much I want to defend the carriers. I've got some cruisers and battle cruisers there. I may just let the carriers die if they do, because they really are ineffectual, and I'm unlikely to get the tech up to the point where I can use them. My goal here is to do as much damage as I can. I feel like the Italian Navy is going to come out of this pretty much gone, so I might as well fight out to the bitter end, basically. On the dice you roll late in a battle, it's very unlikely for a surprise to happen, but it has. The Axis, the Italians, have managed to not get found by the Allies. Now, part of that is because they have less squadrons, ships out there, but it probably looks to the Allies like, oh, they're disengaging, which is why the surprise ends up happening. And what we're going to get is a surprise airstrike over on this guy, and then I don't know if we actually want to engage this thing. It's bigger than us. We're sitting out there without a very good number. This attack didn't do too much good. It ended up sinking the Royal Oak. And this is our losses. You can see the Italians actually acquitted themselves fairly well, I guess. But in the end, they decided to break off because basically all they had left were their carriers. Their carriers can't fight in a fleet battle. They just get shot up. They're just target practice. So I figured, you know, better to save them. Maybe I get another chance with some ships to screen them, and maybe I get to do some more damage. As it is right now, we'd just be sacrificing them for maybe a shot. And what I was really trying to do was hunt the landing force. We halved it because it had, exactly the number of destroyers it needed, but we weren't able to knock it out completely, which means the invasion is going to proceed. Something I missed, the U.S. election, there's a required election in 45. Otherwise, it's basically due to terrible events, atomic attacks against the U.S. or Britain or Russia surrendering. I was supposed to calculate this as soon as the 45 YSS was done, the year start sequence. And I just did it in my head, and it ends up it wasn't going to affect anything. When I added these up, we ended up with Axis diplomatic points versus Allied diplomatic points. The Axis have like a 3-point advantage, mainly because Italy was doing so well at that point. They're maybe not doing so well now, but they really are invested in the North Africa thing. However, Britain not being in a state of surrender cancels that out and then some, gets us above the 0 level, so the U.S. is able to operate normally. Over in the Pacific, I haven't checked that one, Japanese resistance level, what's that going to be? Wow. On the other hand, though, we got 20 points to overcome for declaring war on the U.S., and that's going to be pretty tough. So I'll look at that and take it into account, but I doubt it's going to have any effect. We'll see. I just have to count all the objective hexes the Japanese hold, which right now is 1, 2. We'll get it right here. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Looks like about 25. I think I counted Vladivostok though, so that would be 24, which means the U.S. kind of essentially signs off in the Pacific, which probably would end the game there, because ceasing economic warfare, boom, it's over. The Japanese are going to be reducing casualties. American forces cannot initiate ground combat attacks at less than 2-to-1 odds. Well, I think I went into Midway with less than 2-to-1. Can't conduct full offensives. Can't engage in offensive operations. I'm going to continue playing with what I'm doing. But I think Japan just won the war. Because nothing is going to trigger another U.S. election, right? And Japan's going to be able, if the U.S. can't conduct offensive operations, full offensives, they can't take any of these islands. If they can't conduct economic warfare, Japan's going to get their transports all back, right? So I would say the Pacific War was just won by Japan, and that was this delaying tactic, which actually worked pretty damn well. Again, though, there were probably some mistakes on the U.S. side and some unlucky combats, maybe. But I think mainly it was the mistakes of not having enough battleships. So I just looked up some more of the effects of that chart, and the U.S. would temporarily withdraw. Again, we'll give them, some turns of victory, when we balance it. But I think the Japanese have won the Pacific map in terms of the game. But in terms of the war situation, they're going to still generate tensions. And those tensions include the oil embargo. They include an automatic point. Indochina is a continuing one, I guess. Germany and the U.S. at war is a continuing one. So essentially what it would have meant is a one-turn pause in activity. And I'm just going to try to remember that I'll assess a one-turn penalty to whatever victory, you know, if the Japan falls in, say, fall of 46, it'll count as winter of 46. Theoretically, that breathing space would have actually allowed the Japanese a little bit better than that in terms of getting their shipping up and everything. But, you know, I think they're doing pretty damn well, so we'll just leave it as that in terms of a balancing factor. You can see Germany's not long for this world. Allied forces have crossed the Rhine, actually, up here in Essen, and over here we've pocketed this. We've pocketed this big set again. U.S. forces landing in Italy. Now, Italy's in fair shape, but, you know, they can't hold up against this. And the Russians, well, crossing the Vistula, actually, they had to pop that partisan unit so that it wouldn't be a problem. You're allowed to destroy your own units, and that opened up a path where I could make the attack. The Russian exploits, I actually focused on an armor attack here with intention not to attack Warsaw, but to kind of get more force against it. Because the problem is, as long as Warsaw is here, these units are in at least partial supply. And I wasn't going to come through with enough force from either side. I didn't really have exploiting armor up here. I used the armor to cross the Vistula. To be able to launch a real attack there, though. So instead, I did a breakthrough attack that got me over here that cuts this guy off out of supply. And then, you know, it makes this whole southern front for the Germans a lot more questionable to be supporting it, because Germany's about to fall. I don't think Germany has much longer to last. We got another firestorm in here, hit a couple of oil plants just to see if, I don't know, it's adding insult to injury, but honestly, I'm only getting 3, 4, I think I have more. There's an oil plant here. This plant is still in existence. 5, although I can hit that one with my rockets. The Germans don't have money to absorb these losses, so they just have to take them because of the attack here. So yeah, they're right about the edge of their oil. If Mosul falls, they're in trouble, and it's just that simple. They just don't have much oil. I lost some of my oil plants down here in the Ruhr Valley and stuff. They're over here. Lost fortifications. These fortifications have been destroyed that I've crossed. I don't have a way to mark that unless I dig through Gathering Storm and get the, hey, the fortifications are gone markers. I'll just try to remember. I think it's going to be over pretty quickly, and it's not going to be a big issue. The firestorms are really annoying, though, because from my reading of the rules, and maybe I'm wrong, but they mean I can no longer bomb that area. And they don't mean that the Germans lose the economic value for that forever. They take a hit right now, and then they take some, you know, when the bomb hits, but then they're immune to further attacks, essentially. And they still get the economic value for it. I tried looking anywhere I could find for it. Certainly anything under firestorms doesn't tell it. So that's the best I can see, is that you kind of don't want to firestorm cities or atomic bomb them. And although atomic bomb counts as... So atomic bomb is a weird rule because it counts as a captured hex for victory conditions and diplomatic points, but not for anything else, including the economic effects. So you'd still get the economics for it, I think. Germany still holds, actually, the Netherlands here, sort of. They just lost Luxembourg. Of course, these are going to have to be, they're going to have to be evaluated next turn because the Germans actually get the points for them next turn temporarily in case they can take them back. Not much happening down here. I'm still going to have some strategic redeployment, so these forces up here are going to push forward a little bit more. I can't keep punching forward through Lebanon, Syria. All of this is going to fall, though. I'm considering, and I think this is what I'm going to do, force the pass for this turn on the Pacific. Force the U.S. to take that pass they should have taken back in the 45 YSS. It would only be one turn because they were only at like -3 or -4 in their values, which is just really a temporary. Yeah, I don't remember which it was, but they get that much tension in one turn, so it would be a one-turn pass, and I think this is probably the best way to handle it. So all we'll be really seeing is some attrition battles over here. I mentioned how there's aspects of the naval game that I really like about this system. I just discovered another one, and I'm not going to catch these all in my review or wrap-up or anything like that. I don't keep notes that are good enough, but in this case, it has to do with the dual attack on Japan, right? I was just considering, well, I'm getting close to the 100 ships that I can keep in Honolulu. Now, by creating this temporary port up here at Midway, or I don't know what it is, provisional port, whatever, artificial port, I've managed to extend what I can put heading in this direction. But I found in World in Flames there was no real limitation. I could base these huge fleets with access to one area, which meant that given the nature of the naval combats in that system especially, it made a lot of sense to concentrate all your force. Here, there is at least some reasoning that I'm seeing where the U.S. might want to move in this direction, not just to grab victory centers more quickly because the Japanese Navy no longer exists, but also because there's only so much Navy that you can support from any given pathway, basically. Honolulu can support 100, and I could put another 50 here now that I've got this port, but otherwise I'm stuck to that 100, and then once I get out here, well, unless I take, Guam is only a regular port, so it's only 50. Truk would be 100, so I could, base a major force there. But moving up in this direction, there's enough space between all these ports that, one or two ports is about all I can really center on. It's not like Europe where I can keep a lot of ships near each other and they can end up supporting each other quite well. The Pacific's much larger, obviously. We push into the winter of spring of 46. We're going to hit the YSS for turn. And, it's clear the Axis is won. The victory conditions, Germany is at 0 on summer of 45. And I think Japan is at 0 on fall of 45, the historical fall dates. And you start counting up from there, so that's 1, 2. If Germany falls, they're at a +3 victory conditional. If Japan falls, they're at 1 per turn for however far it takes for that. So I could conceivably call this and say it's an Axis victory, and it's sort of a nonsensical Axis victory. There's no way, I think, of reasonably assigning a sole victor when it comes down to, hey, did the Japanese beat the Germans? How do you possibly make that judgment when they both lost? That's really the problem with it. Is the game actually handles a fair assessment of if there's an Allied victory, which side to give the victory to, whether it's the Western Allies or the Russians. And that's by simply counting up the objective hexes, and then there's some technological factors surrounding the atomic bomb, which can allow it. And then as another option, there's, hey, do the patent plan, go up against the Soviets and try to knock them out completely. As it stands here, the Soviets are not, it looks like, going to be grabbing a lot of land. I'm going to keep playing, maybe not to the bitter end, but far enough that I can see, the island hopping attacks, which we really haven't seen at all, coming back. Against no defense, though, really. The Japanese can't manage much, but the turns respite is helpful. It gets them some more transports. That gets them more oil so that they can maybe make another naval sortie, or maybe produce some of these huge quantity of carriers that they have stockpiled. It's not like they've been mistake-free either. I totally overproduced my Navy in terms of capital ships and carriers, well, carriers especially, and neglected some of my transports, and that definitely cost me. But, the situation on the ground does not look terribly good for them. So yeah, this would be a fair point to call the game, largely because there isn't that rivalry between the U.S. Or between the Western Soviet pact alliances, because there's really no fair way to justify, hey, who won between Germany and Japan? It comes down to negotiation with the Allies? What? That's the only way I can see you coming to a value there is, oh, hey, ignore Europe, go for Japan first, or go for Germany first. In terms of assessing the overall, hey, did the Allies win? Well, obviously they didn't in this case. But, if they've got a chance of winning, I'm not sure why they would pursue, unless their global strategy is somehow determined by the situation. Unless there's something, Germany can do to convince the Allies that they actually want to fight Japan first. And actually, this game would have been the optimal situation for that, because the war was going to start so late in Europe. But the problem is the U.S. really can't gear up much faster. I may have screwed up some things, but they have a tough time against Japan alone in the early stages of the war. So even though they could have gone to war with Japan earlier, that was up to the Japanese to choose. And I think the Japanese outplayed their historical situation, and I honestly think that playing for time works maybe a little too well in this game. I've been trying to, say, well, I made errors on the U.S. side, but I don't know if they're significant enough, and if they overshadow the Japanese production errors and choices so significantly that it's not in general a decent strategy. And what's nice about this strategy is you keep that oil embargo from happening for a long time. You're not going to win in China. In WIF I've tried in this in the Empire of the Rising Sun Advanced Third Reich combination, and it just doesn't happen. I think it's harder here than in WIF. In WIF I sort of succeeded by cheating. But yeah, here it's really, really tough. The best you can do, I got Chongqing, and I got it without too many offensives. There may have been something I screwed up to cause that. The Japanese expansion in the early part of the war was very limited. You got to remember, they had trouble taking the Dutch East Indies, taking Hong Kong, stuff like that. They had to really kind of scrape the barrel and pull in, extra turn attacks and delay when they were making things. But I think that worked out overall to their advantage, just because they delayed the start of the war long enough. There wasn't a huge U.S. buildup. Now, what the U.S. could have done was they start with a lot of tension against the Axis because of how late Gathering Storm was going to put things. They could have built for Japan And if they had done that, if they had loaded for Japan instead, build up the Navy and whatever, Japan could have been over very quickly instead of what we've got. But in that case, then I'm pretty sure that the Germany wouldn't be on the brink of falling if I hadn't put a really hefty effort in terms of troops, ships, everything like that. Because Russia is not. Russia is the big bonus for the Germans, and they just weren't available for the war. Now, that's horrible for Russia more than anyone else. Like the U.S., if somehow the Allies could win the overall war, then Russia's the one who pays the price for the German win in Gathering Storm, which feels a little funky. So even though Gathering Storm's a 3-player game, there's not much Russia can do to prevent what the Germans did in it. Now, there might be a lot the Allies, the Western Allies, could have done to prevent it, and they probably wanted to. But then they're facing, the challenge, the competition with Russia over defeating Germany, perhaps. Anyway, like I said, we'll keep going. This is largely over, though.